I wanted to make a piece of work, a sculpture, an installation that filled the whole room. And I wanted to use the room to make it. It became important because I was dealing with issues of brain trauma, whether it be through chronic disease or for whatever reason, that I wanted the spaces in the room to hold the sculpture, for the work only to be possible, to be held up by the gaps, by the spaces. I wanted something that was going to just be held by the gaps, by the bits that we ignore, by the spaces. And that just became slowly more poignant when I was within the visual arts sessions, working with people. We were discussing, what was possible because of dementia, or because of gaps, because of memory lapses, because of spaces. What was only possible because of them, rather than what you'd lost. The project's called Eloquent Brain, and it's an ongoing project that started a year ago in 2015, and it sprung from one of my own works, which was a site-specific piece that went into House of Helver during the Clown Festival, which comprised of thousands of different empty blank envelopes inserted into the gaps of the floorboards of the building. I stayed with that piece as part of the Clown Festival and discussed the piece, because it's quite sensitive, engage people's reactions to it. And the more that I spoke to people about it, we realised it was a point of communication. It was a point that it stimulated communication. And the fact that the envelopes were blank at this stage was important and significant. And at the same time, I was asked to develop some visual art sessions for people with dementia, both in Denbighshire and in Conway. And it struck me this was an opportunity to use as a support within these sessions. I asked participants if they were interested in using some of the envelopes I'd used in the installation as a support for their own works to develop, which they were really eager to, really enjoyed. We all really enjoyed working with the concept of the envelope and explored lots of artists that have used this format. And that built and grew. And then the opportunity arose really to create an art piece that was part participatory. Connected Communities asked Dementia Imagination, one of the projects that arranged these sessions, to put forward an idea of 2 workshops within the community that involved people participating, and then a way of discussing the idea of utopia, what a future utopia could be for society, and what a future utopia could be for people living with dementia within it. So it's a case of people coming together to discuss or to have conversations about how we think things could be better in the future. And the way that the title they read it is Utopia. Does anybody know what utopia means? It means a perfect place, perhaps, like a place we all aspire to, where a place with lots of cakes on offer constantly, or a place where it's always sunny, or a place where everyone's got a job and is all they want, or whatever your dreams are. So the idea is that the journey to utopia, all the ideas that you have on the way to imagine a utopia, that's what's important. What we're going to do is make a drawing. Now I know a big collaborative drawing altogether. So working along with Dementia Imagination and Denbighshire Arts. Anything that comes into your head, you can draw, okay? I decided to continue to use the envelopes that originally had been set up in an empty grid-like fashion, and to create a kind of canvas that we would take into the community, into communities or into settings, and that people would be asked to contribute into a collaborative drawing and encouraged to doodle and draw, discuss and chat. Cross-generationally became important. Children, people with dementia, people who care for dementia, people off the street, anybody who wants to turn up. And the idea really was that through this connected drawing that would be slotted together as one kind of canvas, at the end of it, it could be fragmented, and then we would install it together in this sculpture, if you like. And then it's continuing to grow because obviously other people want to sort of contribute drawings to it or rearrange it in certain ways. So it's a great project, but it's a project that's sort of dictating its own terms, and I'm going along with it rather than, the other way around. In general, I work across mediums, I think, and I work in drawing, sculpture, sometimes installation is site-specific, small-scale sculpture, and taking on the whole idea of the space. And I'd say my practice is about looking for connections between things and remaining open and responsive to stimulus around me. Transferring these ideas across medium, it just gives more opportunity to see how the ideas develop and how they change and how they transform. It's a very open practice. I like to respond to the nuances that just by working throw at me. All of these things all sort of come together, and then that's how my practice will develop, or how it develops. It's just all ideas influencing one another. When I had the idea myself to put these sort of component parts of envelopes together to make a large piece of paper, if you like, of course there's still subtleties of edge, shadow and edge. So people had to be encouraged from the very start to cross these. But then some people didn't want to do that, obviously, and the parameters of their envelope became their own personalised canvas. So the motivation of the group, if you like, is to keep moving around. And I had these ideas from a project in LA called the Sumit Project. But to keep moving around the artwork so that your signature drawing, style, narrative ideas start cohabiting spaces of other people's drawings. And it was so exhilarating that after the initial sort of 5 to 10 minutes, or not even 10 minutes, of quiet sort of consideration of the paper, a bit nervous who's going to draw first, that rapidly broke down. People start talking and chatting and influencing each other, adding, some people mischievously, when other people's back turned, adding to their drawing, other people collaborating, if I do this and you do that. And so it's just, it's just fantastic to watch and be involved with, because it just seems so easy. So even though I hinted at things, I didn't want to make anything completely static. So some people did lift envelopes off the cellophane and move them closer to them so that they could concentrate on detail or example. But then that would then be taken by somebody else to make space themselves, or place back where it was removed, because that bothered somebody else. So it was a continuously fluid, true collaborative, drawing experience, which was great. The way these have been grouped together, there's enough to group for 3 grids, and it's a combination of the way people were asked to, when they fragmented their drawing, to find narratives or group things by story or theme, or were encouraged with me to find ways to group things formally with weight of line or just movement or rhythm. So I am, and then I'm into it. So this is kind of a collaborative choice of order, not chronological as it was, but a collaborative decision making. But then I am now adding my own 2 pennies worth to it as well, and kind of making choices. So I'm kind of not completely interrupting the selections that the group's made. I mean, you can see there's lots of kind of music-related things in this corner. But then I've grouped this one with this one. I have moved that one from where it was. So I like the echoing of the logs on end there, and then this kind of concentric pattern. Because the people were encouraged to move around the drawing continuously, and so even though they were using the same materials, their mark making, if you like, crosses over into each other's drawings. Okay, here there's this very obvious kind of home and house, but then here somebody else has put boxes and simplified it, but still in a natural setting, but much more sort of geometric forms. So I'm liking the way that that's reading. It's fun because people have obviously played with horizon lines, but because you can see them behind one another, you can see how one drawing is the sky of another drawing's ground level in some areas, in a much more pictorial way, and in other ways it's just really abstract, but you've still got forms and themes repeating. It's like infinite arrangements. There's a beautiful portrait here that somebody's done of somebody else while drawing, and it's great when it's sort of staggered and only from certain angles you can see it coming together as a full face and body. It became really apparent when I was working with the visual arts sessions, that inviting children along and sort of mixing up the idea of sort of generations worked really well as a stimulus for making work and for sort of stretching creative ideas. So we approached the schools and asked if they'd like to get involved. There's a sophistication to some of the compositions, which means that it does confuse who's done what, which artist has done what. I'm not interested ever in the age of somebody who's made a piece of work, or in fact who's made it. So and you know that because everyone works so closely to one another, and they were talking and they were encouraged by each other's drawing, so everyone was influencing everyone else, generally. I love this one. I think it was wellies, but then if somebody else was looking at loads of wellies interlocked, but somebody was looking at the other day and said they saw macaroni. Somebody else saw pipes, sort of downpipe connections. I like the fact that this way of displaying the work or rebuilding the drawing kind of adds to all the ambiguities. But the stories between, this sort of is interpreted as, I can interpret that as frustration, or there is an anxiety in that drawing for me. And then there's this drawing here of this kind of family group. I can read all sorts of narratives in that. But then I could lift it could be lifted and put next to something else. I think this is a heart of somebody else's drawing, but it almost looks like a boot kind of stamping down on this scene. I should imagine it's probably a heart, but in isolation, it's got an entirely different, or broken up from the rest. And just that tiny little bit missing is giving this whole other sort of narrative to this drawing. I think I was listening to it's probably the radio, knowing me. I was listening to a neurosurgeon. He mentioned about eloquent brain being the part of the brain that surgeons avoid when they're undertaking brain surgery. So there's so much of the brain that's uncharted. The eloquent brain is the bit that they know is responsible for speech and for sense. So they tag it, effectively, with little tags. so they avoid it, so they don't damage it when they're operating on other brain tissue. And I've been working a lot with the idea of wedges and the idea that the paradoxical support of wedges, whether it's splits or support, one of men's oldest tools, and depending on the gesture, it either destroys or mends. And the tensions involved with that. And then this idea of bookmarking and tagging and filing and retrieval. And the idea of a neurosurgeon putting in these little filing tags in the brain sort of kind of visually just stimulated something. And that's where the title comes from. And that's where you have these little metal wedges from the hammerheads placed in the envelopes as little tags. Some of the greatest plans, some of the greatest design have been drawn on the back of an envelope. So every one of these drawings potentially is so important. And they are so important. Going to make tea. Beautiful, kind of wet, just sky. And this one's really interesting, this kind of kingfisher in the living room. But I mean, I could play with this for hours. Dementia is a disease that affects the brain, and through the brain, and affects the entire system in different ways. And as everyone is individual, it affects everybody in individual ways. There are lots of ways that people describe dementia: short-term memory loss, long-term, affecting short-term memory loss more than long-term memory loss. But as far as I can see, it's kind of, from the perspective of going in and working with somebody within the arts, for example, it's kind of irrelevant because it affects everyone in multitudes of complex, different ways. And actually, in a lot of cases, it can be other aspects of somebody's makeup and system that is going to prevent them or cause barriers into making artwork, not dementia. Dementia, in some ways, for some people, in terms of art-making work, frees them up and allows possibilities and creative opportunities that might not have happened without it, and allows for an exploratory kind of a relationship with materials or ideas or concepts, or juxtaposing ideas and concepts that they might not have done beforehand. I think I was shocked. I'm not now, but initially, because I'm not a professional in terms of healthcare. I'm not a professional in anything. And maybe in my naivety, I imagined that there would be a difficulty in communicating initially ideas, and it was just overwhelming to see how much vitality and how much innovation and how much interest in the world was in this room within 10 minutes of being in there, and there wasn't an ambivalent kind of tired attitude. There was an exhilarating attitude, to the point that it became, it's exhausting trying to kind of develop all these fantastic ideas and all these very complex, often very complex perceptions of the world around, the world around everybody within the art group. So I think it's that, I learned very, very, very quickly never to underestimate. I've got to a position where I don't even question who's got dementia and who hasn't. I'm not naive. There are certain situations and times during the disease and illness that it becomes apparent. but I don't. It's not the overrider. I can't distinguish in the work, and I can't often distinguish in the conversation, and I can't distinguish. I can't distinguish between somebody who has or hasn't, who's the carer. I'm often, when I go into groups now, I often don't know who the carer is, I don't really even consider it. Whereas when I first started doing this, I was anxious about getting it wrong. And now, I don't even consider it. I think there's a lot of emphasis on what is lost. And one of the first experiences I had was with working with a group for many weeks, and then one of the guys saying, I couldn't have worked like this before. This is a new chapter, this is a new beginning. And, when I think about what I just read in the press beforehand, I didn't think about new chapters, new beginnings before I started working with people with dementia. It was, I didn't realise that, of course, there's new chapters and new beginnings with dementia. And how challenges still, positive challenges, are still really important.